everybody. Welcome to a special bonus episode of Retro Wrestling with Gene Jackson. If you keep up with my articles, if you read last week's article over on Substack, we talked about Power Pro Wrestling and how it came to be, what drove Randy Hales to try to fill that Memphis Wrestling void. And so I thought this week, as we have just spoke about that, and we're getting ready to head into this new Power Pro review podcast that I'm going to be doing along with BT and Rob Helt. I thought maybe we need to kind of, set the tone and, tell the story of why there was an opening for a new version of Memphis Wrestling, why Randy Hales needed to create a new version of Memphis Wrestling. And I'm going to be putting out an article about that, but also wanted to do a bonus episode of Retro Wrestling, just kind of telling this story. And at some point, we may do another one with Rob, who can really break down the legal aspects of this and really get deeper into this than what I'm prepared to do. But for right now, let's call this episode The Day Memphis Wrestling Died. A long, long time ago, well, not that long ago, but long enough that it feels like a different world now. Back when the wrestling we grew up on was still in a TV studio, back when Saturday morning TV still meant something, and back when Memphis Wrestling still had its own kingdom. And if you were there, we didn't know it at the time, but we were watching this thing we all loved slowly die right in front of us like an ailing family member on life support. So what's the story, you ask? Well, it didn't start with the last show. It starts long before that, with a business already starting to slip away and a man who thought he could not only save it, but somehow make it profitable. In October 1996, through a chance meeting with Jerry Lawler, who happened to own half of the USWA wrestling territory, a man named Larry Burton enters the picture, or at least that's the name he gave people. He was not a wrestler. He was not a promoter. He was an alleged businessman. And that's the key to understanding Larry Burton. He wasn't thinking, oh, how can I keep Memphis Wrestling alive, like Randy Hales' mission was. He was just thinking, how do I turn this into something bigger and then sell it? Now, again, today, that's normal. That's literally how business works these days. But in 1996, Memphis Wrestling, it's like showing up to a pawn shop and trying to pitch venture capital. So Burton starts putting together this deal, and it's not simple. It's layered, incremental buy-ins, investor monies coming through a company called XL Sports, merchandising deals tied into ownership stakes. It's complicated, but more importantly, it's risky, because instead of stabilizing the company first, Burton is building everything around what he thinks it's going to be worth. And here's where it gets really interesting, because at the center of his entire plan is this idea that the company could eventually be sold to Vince McMahon for somewhere in the neighborhood of $6 to $8 million. Now, just let that sit for a second. Memphis Wrestling in the mid to late 90s, if you were following it then, it was losing money, and anyone who watched the TV show at that time could clearly see they were struggling, barely holding on at this point. You didn't have to be an insider. You didn't have to be super smart or a newsletter nerd. You could just turn the TV show on, and if you had watched Memphis Wrestling for years, you knew this thing was in trouble. But he has this plan to flip this promotion for millions of dollars to the WWF. And here's the kicker. There's no proof that there was ever an offer that existed or that he had ever spoke directly to Vince McMahon to think that he would be interested in buying the USWA. Because it's not like Vince McMahon wasn't already aware of the USWA. He knew of the USWA. He used it as a bit of a developmental territory before developmental territories were even actually a thing. It kind of started in the USWA and then would later roll over in a big way to Power Pro. But Anyway, now I want to be fair here because this is where Larry Burton becomes a really interesting character study. There are two ways for you to look at him. Option one, he's a salesman. He knows the deal isn't real, but he presents it like it is to bring in investors and make the numbers work and make people want to give him money to buy this promotion. Option two, he actually believes it. He genuinely thinks I could modernize this thing, scale it up, and make it valuable. And honestly, that second one might be more dangerous because if you believe your own pitch, then you clearly don't see the warning signs that were definitely there. I mean, the warning signs were everywhere. By Burton's own timeline, by mid-1997, over $1 million had already been paid into acquiring the USWA. And according to court documents, there was basically no working capital left by that time. So think about that. You've bought into this company that was already losing money with the idea of you were going to make it super valuable and turn around and sell it for millions of dollars. And now you don't even have enough cash to sustain it or run the business, much less modernize it and make it better. So where does that leave you with your original plan to use marketing, merchandising, and TV syndication to make the USWA suddenly become so profitable that Vince McMahon would feel inclined to pay you 8 to 10 times more than you paid for it just to own it? So by early 1997, the deals are moving fast. There's money changing hands. Contracts are being signed. Ownership percentages are being carved up like pieces of a pie. And on the surface, it looks like growth. It looks like expansion. It seems to have momentum. But underneath, there's a huge problem. The business itself isn't getting better. Attendance isn't booming. Revenue isn't exploding. In fact, both are way down at the time and had been for quite a while. And the thing nobody wanted to say out loud, Memphis Wrestling had been losing money for a long time, a substantial amount of money. Again, by mid-1997, over $1 million had been paid in towards acquiring this company. Now, in most businesses, that would sound like progress, but here, it's something else entirely because according to later testimony, once they found out there was no working capital left, that's right, think about that. This promotion, they've spent over $1 million to purchase. They now realize they don't have any money to run it. The countdown to the inevitable has begun. Summer of 97, the tension is getting high. The expectations don't match the reality. The deal doesn't look as good now as it did on paper. And the big payoff, the big sale that everything was built upon, there's no chance in hell that's happening, to coin a phrase by Mr. McMahon himself. Why would Vince McMahon buy a failing wrestling company that is now owned by people who know nothing about the business they've purchased? And that's when everything blows up. The deals don't hold. The expectations are completely seen to be false. And suddenly the focus shifts from let's build this business, make it something better, to let's figure out who owes who what and who's going to end up holding the bag when this thing's all over. And that's when the lawsuits begin. And I'm not talking about one lawsuit. I'm talking about a full-blown legal war. Bankruptcy filings, fraud claims, RICO allegations, malpractice lawsuits. At one point, you've got a jury finding Burton liable for racketeering. You've got millions of dollars in damages being thrown around, and you've got Jerry Lawler being cleared of any wrongdoing. And once that happens, everything changes because now this isn't a wrestling promotion anymore. It's a legal battlefield. It's no longer about building something. It's about getting out of here with something, not to be the one, as I said earlier, to be left holding the bag. And one of my, I'm going to say favorite stories, but one of the more interesting stories to come out of this, Dutch Mantell told the story one time that he went to court to witness some of this, and that when they put Lawler on the stand, and these guys, Larry Burton and his partner Selker, were trying to sue Lawler because once he sold it to him, they ran this thing into the ground in record time. I mean, they took over, and within a matter of just a few weeks, they had lost most of the TV syndication deal everywhere. They got moved to late night on TV5. I mean, it went to hell in a handbasket like ridiculously fast. But basically, Lawler's defense, when asked about it in court, basically he's like, Judge, if I sell you a car and you don't know how to drive and you go out and crash that car, could you come back and sue me because you crashed the car I sold you because you didn't know how to drive? It's the same difference. These guys came to me wanting to buy a wrestling promotion. They ran it out of business, and now they want to sue me because they bought a business they didn't know anything about. And of course, I mean, you're listening to this right now. That makes perfect sense. The judge seen it the same way. Boom, Lawler's cleared. And again, that happened, and everything started to change because it's no longer about a wrestling promotion or TV or any of that. Now it's just everybody's mudslinging, suing. It's ugly. And so, again, like I said, legal war zone. Everybody's pointing a finger at everyone else. And meanwhile, in all that chaos, when it first was erupting, yes, USWA was still on TV in Memphis and a handful of places. And so, you still had wrestling matches going on. You still had promos and angles to book. The one thing that wasn't going on was selling tickets. The crowds were smaller than they had ever been because wrestlers were leaving. These guys didn't know anything about booking angles or storylines, and the wrestlers didn't respect them. It was crazy. So, behind the scenes, it's already over. There's chaos, and there's a bunch of different stories out there about all the crazy things that happened during this time, things that took place at the TV5 studios, people showing up with guns and phone calls that were made during this period. And, maybe someday on another podcast, we can get into all that. Like I say, I'd like to have Rob come on and discuss the details of the legal aspect. I'm just telling you, all this hell broke loose, but I don't know enough about it to sit and explain it all to you. I don't understand all of it. That Lawler testimony was like the easiest thing for me to understand about that whole situation. But once Lawler removed himself from the day-to-day operations of the USWA, the train just went completely off the tracks, off a cliff. And as of, October 1997, the show just stops.
We'll return after these messages.
If you love old school wrestling, the Retro Wrestling Archive Patreon is where the real treasure is. Get early access to all your favorite Retro Wrestling Archive podcasts and articles before they hit the public feed. Unlock exclusive Patreon-only shows, watch-along videos, and bonus content you won't find anywhere else. And coming soon, the Retro Wrestling Archive Google Drive is expanding in a big way with even more classic wrestling footage, rare media, and archival material for true wrestling history fans. If you're serious about preserving the history of the territories, this is where you belong. Join the Retro Wrestling Archive Patreon today and step inside the archive.
Tired of the same boring wrestling podcast? Need something with attitude, chaos, and maybe just a little cussing? That's stspod.club, and we got it all covered. We've got wrestling weirdness with WTF News Desk, 5-minute time limit, and the Southern fried brain of me, BT, stirring the whole ship. We also have rolling into Mempho every week about the current Memphis wrestling. Interviews, hot takes, and wrestling outrageousness so wild it might get you banned in 12 states. That's right, it's SDSpod.club, or search all podcast catchers for Shooting the Shiznit, where wrestling podcasts grow chest hair. Not sure what that meant. Love my mama.
and gentlemen, welcome to Give Me Back My Pro Wrestling, the podcast that's based on the old school but can still help you find the good stuff from today. Jimmy Street and the Plastic Sheik, Jared, are the undisputed tag team champions of the wrestling podcast world. From thought-provoking topics to superstar interviews to action figure expertise. This team does it all, and all they ask is, give me back my pro wrestling! Every other Thursday, wherever you listen to podcasts.
No announcement, no farewell, no final, speech. No thank you, fans, for all the years of support. The last episode of USWA Championship Wrestling aired on October 18th, 1997. Based on all the wild action over the years and its reputation with the wrestling industry, you would have expected Memphis Wrestling to go out with a bang, with Lance Russell saying, bye-bye, everybody, one last time, live from the WMC studio on a Saturday morning. But it didn't. In fact, the show was no longer live, nor on Saturday morning, nor in the studio. Because again, once the show started going off the rails under the new management, TV5 moved them to a late night time slot. So that October 18th show was a highlight clip show hosted by James Beard, who wasn't in the TV5 studio. He was standing in front of a random wall, could have been anywhere, with a big USWA banner on it. And then the following week, after October 18th, the show didn't air. And it never would again. There was no USWA revival to follow. There was no USWA reboot. It was just years of courtroom drama, appeals, judgment, money being fought over, long after the wrestlers and the wrestling was gone. And the final verdict, who went over, you ask? Well, it didn't happen in a ring. It didn't happen on TV. It didn't even happen in a building. It all ended eventually just in a pile of legal documents. Yeah, that was the end. If you grew up watching Memphis Wrestling, you didn't see this ending coming. There was, no moment when someone stood in the ring and said, well, this is it. No goodbye like the final WCW Monday Nitro, just a show that aired one week and didn't the next. And with that, the last surviving territory in professional wrestling history disappeared and took with it 22 years of tradition in Memphis, Tennessee, while being promoted by Jerry Jarrett. Now let's bring it back to Larry Burton before we end this. Because here's the thing. Larry Burton didn't create the problems in Memphis wrestling. The business was already struggling. The audience was shrinking. The economics were changing. Professional wrestling was changing. Fans were changing. Expectations were changing. And that was all part of a world that Larry Burton knew nothing about, nor did he try to learn about it once he bought his way into the business. He made the mistake of thinking that the wrestling business played by the same rules that all other businesses play by. And that's just simply not the case. He walked into a fragile situation and tried to force it into a model it wasn't designed to support. He bet on potential instead of reality. He built a deal based on projections instead of actual performance. And when it didn't work, there was no safety net. The house of cards came crumbling down. So does that make Larry Burton the villain in this tale? I don't think it's that simple. I don't think he entered this story with bad intentions. He was a businessman who looked at wrestling and saw what he thought it would become instead of what it actually was, and without knowing the limitations of an old pro wrestling territory that in no way functioned like a huge sports entertainment entity like Vince McMahon's WWF. He thought the USWA wasn't ran like the WWF because the owners were too small-minded to see the potential. But the truth was, it was doomed to fail by this time, whether Larry Burton came along or not. You couldn't run the USWA like the WWF. That just wouldn't work. But by this point in time, the old way of running a wrestling promotion, the way Jerry Jarrett had operated all those years, no longer worked either. The fact of the matter is, Larry Burton or not, the USWA as it existed going into 1996 was on its way out. It probably wouldn't have survived much past 97 had Larry Burton not came along. Perhaps in a different time and place, maybe it could have worked. But in Memphis in 1996, not only did Larry Burton's ideas of how to run the territory not save it, he was the guy who steered the ship straight into the iceberg and then wanted to sue the guy who sold him the ship as well as the guy who helped him pay for it. And that's the story of Larry Burton. Not a wrestler, not a promoter, and turns out not a successful businessman by most accounts as you look through the legal documents. But he will forever go down in history as the man who killed pro wrestling's last surviving territory. Now, while the USWA would never return, there was a man with a plan who wanted a shot at reviving Memphis wrestling. He realized that the old way the business had been done in the territory for years no longer worked. But he felt like a mixture of the old ways along with some new ways just might be the way to bring wrestling back to the fans of Memphis. And I talked about that man in last week's column. It was Randy Hales. I hope you'll join us beginning on April 18th at 11 a.m. Central when we begin our weekly watch-along of Memphis Power Pro Wrestling from episode 1 straight through with weekly watch-along to the very end. We'll watch each episode, and then we'll give you our thoughts and opinions on it. What we liked, what we didn't like, how it holds up now, 28 years later. We'll also try our best to speak with people involved with Power Pro back then whenever it's possible. So if you were involved in Power Pro Wrestling in any capacity, and I know a lot of these guys, as does BT, and Rob even knows a few. But reach out to myself, BT, Rob, whoever you prefer, because we'd love to talk to you throughout this whole process. The whole entire life of Power Pro as we go through these different times. We would love to, have people on for an interview, or if you don't want to do all that, man, if you just want to swap emails and just go, oh, here's the deal behind this. You were questioning why this happened. Well, here's why, or here's what we were thinking, or here's what went wrong. Here's what we were going to do, but we pivoted to this. All those types of things. We'd love to hear all that. I think it will provide interesting context and insight to the people watching the show. And this show isn't about being critical of the promotion. It's just about reliving it for those of us who watched it back then, and to hopefully introduce it to a whole new audience that will be experiencing it for the first time and hopefully learning things none of us knew by communicating with wrestlers, referees, announcers, fans, whoever can provide us insight. We want to talk to you because, again, this is just about going back, reliving a promotion that, other than Randy's live streams, hasn't been talked about enough, in my opinion. I mean, my God, there's so many podcasts out there, talking about, God forbid, the WWF, WCW, TNA, AEW, God, there's been a ton of Mid-South podcasts. There's even been some about World Class, Jim Crockett Promotions. All those have been pretty well covered. Some good, some bad, some, I don't know what they were going for. But that's one thing I've tried to do. That's why a lot of people questioned when I picked USWA to make a review show of when we started in 1993. My answer was, well, because I'm going to be watching it anyway, and I find it interesting, and there haven't been 1,000 podcasts done about it. So, why not? And so, me and BT had always kind of kicked around the idea of maybe doing a Power Pro podcast someday. And Rob came along and joined the team, and he never saw Power Pro. He hasn't seen a single episode of it. So each week when he watches these shows, it's going to be for the very first time. He has no insight into it. He has no context. He has no preconceived notions about any of these wrestlers' angles or anything else. So I think that's going to be a lot of fun. So I hope everybody gives it a chance and gives it a listen. And, if you enjoyed this podcast, And if you learned anything from this, check out retrowrestlingarchive.club for all the great content we offer. Numerous podcasts, articles, all sorts of fun stuff over there. You can check it out. You can also join the Patreon for exclusive content you won't find anywhere else. And that's patreon.com/retro wrestling archive. So that's going to be it for this special bonus episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, there's going to be an article about Larry Burton and the death of the USWA coming out within the next week. And that's all for now. So thanks for listening. I'm Gene Jackson. We'll see you next time for another episode of Retro Wrestling.
Hey, we all know the voices that rule the wrestling airwaves, don't we? We know the takes, the rants, and the reviews. But what we don't know is the truth behind how they got there. I'm taking you behind the curtain and into the heart of the grind. This is Behind the Booth, the raw, intimate origin stories of your favorite wrestling podcasters. We're stripping away the personas to find out how the shows you love actually got started. It's real, it's unfiltered, and it's coming to you this April. Hosted by me, Rob Helt, on the JMC Network. We're looking for the next great story, too, so if you're a podcaster or a behind-the-scenes producer with a story to tell, hit me up at Rob Helt on Facebook. Send me a message and let's talk. And we'll see you in the booth.
In a business built on secrets, some stories were never meant to be told. But now, they are. From Memphis Wrestling icons, Dangerous Doug Gilbert and Tommy Wildfire Rich, comes the podcast that not only pulls back the curtain, it rips it down. Real stories. No filters. From wild road stories to the truth behind the headlines, this is the kind of locker room talk you won't hear anywhere else. Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich. New episodes weekly on YouTube, all podcast platforms, and early uncensored access on Patreon. Look us up on DougGilbertPodcast.com.
To Japan, every tale, every stitch, dangerous conversations, you don't change this.
Step back into the wildest territory you forgot you loved. Join Gene Jackson and Rob Helt on the Retro Wrestling Review Continental Wrestling Podcast as they watch every available episode of Continental Wrestling Television. From the explosive beginning in 1985, all the way through the final bell in 1989. Watch along with us exclusively on the Retro Wrestling Archive Patreon, where the full video experience lives. Is listening your preference? The audio version drops everywhere you get podcasts, plus YouTube and Substack. Rediscover the stars, the chaos, and the magic of Continental Wrestling one episode at a time.
Got a stack of VHS tapes, dusty old newsletters, testing men in tiny capes, playing old video games. His basement, a shrine to the past, the